You know, David, sometimes you talk about the word Lord. We sing Lord. And I got in a very interesting discussion with my mom. She was here a couple weeks ago, and she said, now, Lord, that refers specifically to Jesus. And I said, well, you know, actually, in Buddhist culture in Asia, they talk about Lord Buddha. And in other places, they talk about Lord Krishna. And so there's lots of names for Lord, representing God, representing the holy, representing that which is most meaningful. So I thought it was really interesting because, you know, I really appreciate when you tell the congregation, you know, Lord means to you what Lord means to you. And we all have our own personal relationship with God, with Spirit, with the higher power, by whatever name. And so today, I'm going to be talking about Buddhism. And I want you to imagine for a second, as we begin, a leafless tree in the winter coming out of the ground. So if you can just see that in your mind's eye, and imagine the dark branches contrasting against the blue sky. And it looks barren, and it looks dead, but we know better. We know better because we know something about the essence and about the potential of a tree in the winter. We know that all it takes is for the conditions to be right, and it will burst into blossom. Once the temperature and the rain create the right conditions, bam, blossoms. Now keep that image in your mind, that image of a tree that no matter how it looks, you know has the potential with the right conditions to bloom. Okay, so today as I talk about Buddhism, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Buddhism, but I'm also going to tell you a few of the ways that the Buddhists saved Jesus for me. There was a time in my life, I mentioned it on Easter Sunday, when I reached my early 20s, when I was completely disillusioned with Christianity and Jesus and the Bible. That was also the time in my life when I was setting out from America on a 5-year journey to work and travel around the world. Spent much of that time, 4 of those 5 years, in Asia. And as I set out on this great journey, I was determined to learn about all the other religions of the world. And at the time, I didn't expect that this journey would have anything at all to do with Jesus. But oddly enough, he kept popping up in all the most unusual and unlikely places. Wise old Hindu swamis living along the banks of the Ganges River in India, who I went to learn yoga and to study about the Bhagavad Gita and to learn about that tradition. They told parables from Jesus as a way of teaching Hinduism. In the Middle East, I learned from Muslims that Jesus is a very important figure in Islam. As a matter of fact, he's a prophet in Islam. I spent time studying various forms of Buddhism in places like Japan and Korea and Tibet and Thailand. And my Buddhist teachers had a lot to say about Jesus. Now, I came to realize that Christians are not the only ones who think that they know and understand who Jesus was and how to understand his life. By the end of my 5-year trip around the globe, I discussed Jesus not only with Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists, but also with Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, with Christians in China and Korea, and with Unitarians in places like the Philippines and India, Czechoslovakia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Hungary, and Transylvania. And what I learned was that even Christians who live in other cultures often see Jesus differently than the way I saw Jesus, having grown up here in America. These cross-cultural experiences, they helped me to realize that the Jesus that I'd rejected was based on a very particular interpretation of Jesus in the Bible. We could call it a fundamentalist interpretation here in America. And these experiences taught me that I needed to give Jesus another look. Now, for those who know the Bible, this could be considered my Saul on the road to Tarsus experience. Right? The way that the story goes, Paul, who was known then as Saul, was a prominent Jew who was opposed to Jesus during his own life. However, after Jesus died, Saul was on his way to Tarsus, and he saw a vision of Jesus, and he was struck blind. But on the trip, he regained his sight when he regained a new understanding of who Jesus was and what his life was about. Now, keep in mind that every form of Christianity, whether it's Methodist, Southern Baptist, Unitarian, or Pentecostal, is really a particular interpretation of what the life and teachings of Jesus are about. Each tradition provides a set of eyes through which to look at the life of Jesus, how to view God, how to view Jesus, and it's taught in different ways in different churches, through this community, throughout the world, wherever you are. But more importantly, each interpretation is an attempt to understand who are we and how should we live. Now, have you ever been in a conversation with someone and they say, now you're interpreting the Bible now, and you can't interpret the Bible, you need to accept what it says, literally. This is a common conversation I find in Oklahoma since moving here. People are concerned about interpretation. Oh, be careful, that's interpretation. But what these people don't understand is that the Bible itself is an interpretation. Think about that. The Bible itself is an interpretation. Let's keep in mind that the Bible is not one book. The Bible is a library of books, right? It includes many writings by many authors that have been compiled over many centuries. On the Christian scriptures, commonly known as the New Testament, each of the authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, Peter, James, and the others, they each are telling his particular interpretation of Jesus' life and ministry. That's why sometimes they're in conflict. They contradict each other. They have a different view because each one is telling us the story through their eyes. Now, of course, in the 3rd and 4th century, when the people who gathered all these stories together and created what we know now as the Bible, they decided that certain books would go into the Bible and certain books would be excluded from the Bible, making it their interpretation, again, of what is right and what is wrong, and who is Jesus and who is Jesus not. So the Bible itself is an interpretation filled with books of interpretations about who is Jesus, but more importantly, who are we and how should we live?